Babies do some pretty strange things that when you see them for the first time can cause you to naturally wonder if something is wrong. Now, some of these are perfectly normal, while others are a genuine cause for concern. But how do you know which one's which? Well, in this video, I'm going to help you with that. I'm going to walk you through 6 strange behaviours that parents frequently ask me about as a paediatric occupational therapist. And for each one, I'll explain the developmental reason behind that behaviour and give you clear guidance on what's normal versus what does warrant a call to your paediatrician or health professional. Let's take this first behaviour that you'll likely see multiple times throughout the day. And it's where your baby is lying there, nice and still, and suddenly their whole body jerks, their arms fly out to the side and they cry out. And when you see this, it is really easy to look at them and think, oh my gosh, something is seriously wrong. But as strange as this looks, it is actually really normal. It's called the Moro Reflex, which is also known as the startle reflex. And it's one of those primitive reflexes babies are born with. When your baby senses a sudden change, whether that's a loud noise, a quick movement, or even just the feeling of being laid down into their crib, their nervous system triggers that Moro reflex. So rather than being a sign that something is wrong, it's a sign that your baby's nervous system is working exactly as it should. Now you'll see the startle reflex the most during those first few months, and it should begin to fade by 3 to 4 months of age and then disappear completely at around 6 months as your baby's nervous system matures. Now, most of the time, this reflex follows that timeline, but occasionally there are a few variations that are worth mentioning to your paediatrician. If the startle reflex is still going strong after 6 months, that's something to bring up. The same goes if you notice that it's much stronger on one side of the body than the other, as reflexes should be pretty symmetrical. And if your baby seems to startle constantly throughout the day without any obvious trigger, or the movement looks different to what I just described, so it's more rhythmic jerking or their body going completely stiff, those are also worth a conversation with your doctor. Okay, now let's talk about your baby's eyes. When your little one is lying on your lap and you're chatting with them, you might notice that their eyes aren't quite working together yet. One eye might be looking at you while the other one is drifting towards the ceiling, or both eyes drift towards their nose and cross. When you see this, you might naturally think that something is wrong with their vision. But in those early months, your baby's eye muscles are still figuring out how to work as a team. These tiny muscles need to learn precise movements to track objects and focus on faces. And that takes time. So for the first few months, occasional eye wandering or crossing is completely normal. And by around 4 months, as their eye muscles get stronger and their visual system develops, you should see this happening less and less. Now the key word here is occasional. If you're noticing that your baby's eyes are constantly turning out or in, not just now and then, but most of the time, that's different from the random wandering we're talking about. The same thing goes if their eyes are still crossing or wandering frequently after 4 months, or if you see their eyes shaking or trembling. Any of those patterns are worth bringing up with your paediatrician at your next visit, and they can refer you to a paediatric ophthalmologist if needed. Now, eye coordination takes time to develop, and so does pretty much every other movement your baby makes. Which brings me to something else you'll probably notice during playtime. Those sudden jerky movements with their arms and legs. Their hand might suddenly fly up and smack themselves in the face, or their leg might do this big kick out of nowhere. These jerky movements can honestly look really strange and a little concerning. But every one of those jerky movements is your baby learning how their body works. They're testing things out, figuring out what their arms and legs can do, and slowly learning how to control them. Now, most of the time, these movements are completely normal. But if you notice that the movements are rhythmic and repetitive, so the same motion is happening over and over in a pattern, that's different from the random, unpredictable movements we just talked about. And if your baby's body stiffens or goes completely rigid during these episodes, that's also something your pediatrician needs to know about. And if those movements are happening primarily on one side of their body rather than on both sides, you want to bring that up as well. Now, if your baby seems to lose consciousness or awareness during these episodes, that's an immediate trip to the hospital, not a wait and see situation. So during the day, your baby's testing out their body with all these jerky movements, but at night, that's when you'll see a completely different set of strange behaviours. Instead of peaceful silence, you'll hear your baby squirming, grimacing, and making sounds that give you the impression that they're extremely uncomfortable or upset. And at some point, you might find yourself standing over the crib trying to decide if they're awake and need you to pick them up. But here's what you need to know. Your newborn spends about half their sleep time in what's called active sleep. Now, this is similar to REM sleep in adults, but there's one big difference. As adults, our bodies are essentially paralyzed during REM sleep, but your newborn doesn't yet experience that paralysis, which means they move around a lot and make all sorts of noises. They might smile, frown, suck, or even open up their eyes. And none of this means that they're uncomfortable or need you to step in. In fact, if you were to pick them up every time they make a sound, you'll probably wake them up, which means less sleep for the both of you. And look, I know you're exhausted, but if you do have enough energy just to hit that like button and subscribe, it'll help make sure that these videos keep showing up when you need them at 3 a.m. Now, the key to getting more rest is learning the difference between what it sounds like when your little one is in active sleep and when they're actually awake. In active sleep, your baby's eyes are usually closed or fluttering, and even though they're noisy, they're not escalating towards a full cry. And if you wait a moment, they usually settle back down on their own. But if their movements increase and the sound becomes more persistent and louder, they're awake and they need you. Now, if sleep is an area that you are struggling with, I've got a free guide that might help. It's called the New Parent's Guide to Naps, and it covers everything from newborn sleep right through to toddlerhood when they finally drop that last nap. You'll get realistic expectations for how many naps your little one needs, how long their wake windows should be, and age-appropriate sleep schedules. And the link to that's in the description if you want it. Now, sleep can be confusing enough on its own, but feeding often brings with it its own set of puzzling behaviours. And one question parents ask me all the time is whether their little one is allergic to something in their breast milk or their formula, because they've noticed that when they feed their bub, they start to squirm and then they start grunting and they always poop or pass win. Now, when you see this pattern happening feed after feed, it is natural to think that something you're eating or something in the formula must be causing them pain and discomfort. But most of the time, what you're seeing is your baby's digestive system doing exactly what it's designed to do. It's called the gastrocolic reflex, and it's actually a really helpful process, even though it looks uncomfortable. When food or milk enters your baby's stomach, it stretches. And that stretching sends a signal down to their colon that basically says, food is coming, make room. So the colon contracts and starts moving things along, which is why your baby suddenly needs to poop or pass win right in the middle or immediately after eating. So rather than being a sign that something is wrong, it's actually a sign that your baby's digestive system is working properly. Now, occasional grunting and straining during feeds is normal. But if your baby is fussy at the breast or bottle every single time, not just occasionally, or they seem irritable or unhappy most of the day, or their stools are hard and very dry, or if you notice that there's blood or mucus in their stool, or the color seems off, like it's a red, a white, light gray, or remains black after those first few days of life, it's a good idea to talk to your pediatrician, as these symptoms could suggest an underlying condition that needs attention. Now, the gastrocolic reflex explains why your baby might grunt and strain during feeds. But there's another feeding behaviour that often catches parents off guard, and this one happens after the feeding's done, and that is spit-ups. If your baby is spitting up after every single feed, you can start to wonder if they're keeping anything down at all and get a little concerned about their weight gain. But most babies spit up regularly, and this is what we call reflux. Reflux happens because there's a muscle called the lower esophageal sphincter at the entrance of their stomach that's supposed to act like a valve, keeping the milk down where it belongs. But in babies, especially those under 6 months, that muscle is still developing and it isn't strong enough yet to do its job properly. Think of it like a door that doesn't quite close all the way. So milk flows back up from the stomach into the tube that connects to their mouth. And sometimes that liquid comes right back out of their mouth, which is the spit up that you're seeing. Now, for most babies, that spit up doesn't bother them at all. And as they get older and that sphincter gets stronger, and as they start sitting up more, they generally stop spitting up as often and then it will gradually stop. So if your baby is spitting up, but they seem happy and they're gaining weight, this is normal and you do not need to worry. But if your baby's arching their back during or after feeds and seems genuinely in pain, not just a little fussy, but really distressed, or they're refusing to eat, or they're not gaining weight the way they should be, or they're irritable most of the time, not just during or after feeds, it's worth raising these concerns with your doctor or pediatrician, as it could be a sign that the reflux is bothering them and they need a little help. Now, speaking of irritability, one of the hardest parts of having a newborn is figuring out what all those different cries mean. Your baby cries when they're hungry, when they're uncomfortable, when they're bored, and when they're tired. But all of these cries sound basically the same, which makes it really hard to know what they actually need. And that's exactly why I put together this video. In it, I walk you through 6 different reasons babies cry, and then I step you through a simple formula that you can use to figure out exactly what your baby is trying to tell you and soothe them as quickly as possible. So if you want to make those crying moments less stressful, make sure you watch that one next.